Welcome to the Working Tools Podcast, where today will be part 2 of our discussion of the Perils of the Perfect Ashlar, an article on the Midnight Freemason by Worshipful Brother Robert E. Jackson.
Ladies and gentlemen, brethren all, welcome to the Working Tools Podcast, a casual conversation around Freemasonry. First, it's important to note that our thoughts and opinions are our own and do not reflect those of our Grand Lodge or respective craft or concordant bodies. Please connect with us and ask questions via our website at theworkingtoolspodcast.com.
Today on the Working Tools Podcast, we once again have our usual full complement of, I almost said officers, of hosts. So we have myself, Very Worshipful Brother Matthew Appel. I'm a member of Mill Creek Lodge number 243 here in Montlake Terrace, Washington. Very Worshipful Brother David Colbeth, who is a member of King Solomon Lodge number 60 in Auburn, Washington. Worshipful Brother Jarrod Dunham of Penticton 147 in Penticton, British Columbia. And Worshipful Brother Stephen Chung of Prince Charles Lodge 153 in Kelowna, British Columbia. And we are again talking about this article, The Perils of the Perfect Ashlar, as part of our series of article discussions. It's on the Midnight Freemasons website. There will be links in the show notes to it. It's by Worshipful Brother Robert E. Jackson, who's a Mason in, I think, Massachusetts, if I remember correctly.
Yeah. And maybe this thing should have been titled The Perils of Trying to Become a Perfect Ashlar, rather than, the perils of the perfect Ashlar, because I think, we talk about it being, or he talks about the journey, and it seems like a lot of internal struggle. So I think that'd probably be a much more appropriate title. But as we're continuing on, it says, looking for the instructional books as I was not yet the master builder. If only I could attain enlightenment. Well, really, enlightenment is received with every piece of work done properly. Properly is important. So, if you participate in Freemasonry, you get enlightened every time you participate. That's the way I see it.
Okay, I'm going to throw a quote in here that I've been sitting on for a while. Adam Savage has the best quote for all of this stuff. And it's, there is no failure, just input. And I think that is the best way to approach everything. As if it's not that you didn't do it, but you now know what didn't work when you tried.
Yep. I think Thomas Edison had a similar quote. It's, I didn't fail 1,000 times to make a light bulb. I discovered 1,000 things that don't work, or something along those lines.
Yeah, and I made a note on the bottom of this one. The last note I made was, being a perfectionist, we're our own worst enemy, especially when we're trying to keep a level head and straight thoughts along our journey.
Says the guy who just said your ritual has to be perfect.
Well, yeah,
like a good past master with the waggy finger.
Well, if you do not deliver your work well, right, then you might not be prepared to learn the lessons from it. Because here, an example. So some guys are really good at just reciting stuff from memory, but not really understanding it. They're not talking with emphasis. You can tell that they're just regurgitating it from memory. They might not really understand it. You have to connect with what you're saying in a lot of these lectures in order to be able to receive the lesson that's actually there for you, in my humble opinion.
Right, but I think going back to what you were saying, what you were saying before you just said that, which I totally agree with. Each time you sit and hear these words, each time you contemplate them, each time you take them on board and hold them as part of yourself, is a step in that direction. And you're never going to be the perfectly shiny stone that comes out of the rock tumbler or whatever, but you could be.
I'm working on it. You see, it's shiny.
A rock tumbler, that explains a few things. But it's each time you take it to heart, I think, is a step along that journey. I wholeheartedly agree with you. So we closed out the last episode. Steve, you were saying about there was a part of the article you disagreed with about the present and
thanks for reminding me of that. At one part here, after he talks about a simple statement, that goal that was putting me back into mind, time, and removed me from the now. One of my favorite lines from this book so far is, and this is his quote, "The past is the past, and there isn't anything that can be done to change that." This I agree with. As it continues, "The future is the future, and whatever happens will happen." That I don't agree with. You can affect the outcome of certain situations. So it's not necessarily ever what happens. If you just live life as it comes, and instead of trying to affect directional change, then sure, that will be the case every single time. Well, what happens, right? There's nothing I can do about it. That's because you didn't do anything about it. You didn't do anything to affect the outcome of it, right? I've tried to instill these thoughts into my teenagers, and I thought that it didn't work, but you could tell years later some of the things they've said now that they're 30 and so on. Hey, it did sink in, because it is a world where if you really try, you can affect the outcome of every situation, and hopefully to your desired outcome. I know it's a little Machiavellian, right? But so mote it be.
But I think what he's really trying to say there is, you can't, like, the future will be what it will be. You may be able to affect it, but the present is when you will be doing that change, and which is why he's saying you need to focus on the present. What you do now is what will affect change possibly in the future, but it's not a guarantee. And stressing out over whether it will or will not happen is not the point. The point is to do the work now, hoping that the work you do now will bring you the outcome that you desire.
Yeah, that's hoping that you get the desired outcome. But it is without question what you do now will help shape the future. Without question, the future is made up of the past efforts, right? So,
well, no, but that's what he's saying, is that the past can't be changed. You can't go backwards. The future will be whatever the future will be. The now is what you need to focus on, because you may be able to affect the future, but it won't be in the future you affect it. It will be in the now, and which is why he's talking about focusing on the now. Do what you can now, and that's all will be possible.
I can accept that.
Yeah. So his statement actually is true, and I think I don't know what the word I want to look for is there. I was going to say lovely, but that's not quite the word I want.
I think the element of not stressing about it is also important. Yes, I agree with Steve that you can have influence not only through I'm waving my hands, heebie-jeebie, whatever you want to call it, the electrons and the belief in that you can direct the future, but also that I think Steve alluded to earlier is that you can affect the future by your thought process. Hey, instead of when that guy cuts me off, instead of laying on my horn and jumping out of my car and going beat on his window, I can affect the future by not doing those things. And so your actions, while you can also project what you want to happen in the future, what you do, as Jarrod alludes to, what you do now will affect the future as well, because what if you just sit on the couch and play video games all day? Now, maybe you'll be a video game star, but you're probably not going to improve yourself. And I think that's the path of what he's talking about. And you also can't worry about the future. Again, going back to that, you can't worry about what is or isn't, because, as Jarrod said, it's going to be what it's going to be, even though we think we can change it or affect it. There's lots of things at play there.
And I've been reading some Stoic stuff lately stuff about Stoicism, I suppose, more accurately. And one of the things that I was reading reminded me of something I read long ago in the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. Anybody read that book? I thought it was really cool at the time. There's still parts of it that echo in my mind once in a while. And they talk about the circle of, the circle of concern and your circle of control. And your circle of concern, things that affect you, is huge. Whatever. If there's a nuclear war, that'll certainly affect you. But it's not something you can control necessarily. You can control a much smaller subset of that. And those are the things you should work for. Me worrying about whether or not there's going to be a nuclear war, not something I can affect. Or an earthquake is not something I can affect. I can affect my circle of control. Maybe I can be ready for if there is an earthquake. If I think that might happen, I can have some water on hand and I can have some freeze-dried food or whatever. But that I can control. And worrying about whether or not it happens is not productive, I guess.
Absolutely. And I think we have some curious tools that talk about circumscription of things within our control. Now, I know we allude to ideas of how we're supposed to maintain ourselves or how we're supposed to act, but I also think it alludes to exactly what you're talking about, Matt. Things that we can control, and then things that you can't control are outside of that circle, or maybe a bigger circle.
Hey, that's where the Serenity Prayer came from.
Yes. The Serenity Prayer is actually kind of a cool thing. It's one of those things everyone thinks has been around forever, but it only came, I forget, it was the 30s or something it was written. It's not as old as at least I thought it was. Maybe I'm the only one.
The wisdom that it exudes makes one believe that it would have been a much older statement or piece written, right? Mm-hmm. But you're right. Yeah, it was in the early 30s that was originally written.
To be clear, for those of you listening to this in the far future, that's the 1930s, not the 2030s. This podcast episode will no doubt echo through time into the future.
Hey, I'll be happy if somebody's listening to us past the 2030s.
2030 this evening?
I was just listening to the Short Talk Bulletin podcast, and they were talking about something happening in 1875 or 1872. It was 150 years ago, and I thought, wait a minute, the math doesn't work out. That's older. Well, that's really old. That's not a recent publication. Don't ever do math on live.
So one of the things, this isn't exactly, again, on topic, but one of the things that this article brought to my mind was, long ago I read, and I can't find the source for it anymore, and it bugs me because I'm sure it's in one of those books back there. There was an article about, it was about the Ashlar, and it was talking about and how it related to the trowel. And so the trowel, at least in our ritual, is used to spread the cement of brotherly love and affection to unite Masons into a common group. Or that's not the ritual, but you get the idea. And the article was saying that if your Ashlar is rough, if you've neglected your Ashlar and you're all spiky in random directions, that in order to fit you into the building of Masonry, in order to fit you into society, you need a lot more mortar that you're going to have to slap on there to get the other stones around you to work. And the resulting structure won't be as strong because, mortar isn't what buildings are made out of, right? It's the stone that the buildings are made out of. And so it was an interesting article talking about how it takes more effort and will not build as good a structure if you're not working on you. Then it's going to be harder for everyone else, I guess is basically what it boils down to.
So what you're telling us is we should all conform now.
Yes.
You will be assimilated.
You know, I did not think the Borg were going to come up in the discussion.
Well, they do fly a cube. Come on.
Is it perfect and shiny? No.
It's perfect.
Yeah.
They all get along.
The beehive, by the way, another thing we should discuss. But anyway. So I guess I'm trying to look at out of the corner of my eye at the list of things I had wanted to talk about, and I think we hit most of the points that I was thinking about from this article. Is there anything particularly salient that you guys were thinking of?
Well, at the end, he talks about that he still struggles, right? Every day, even writing the paper, he was diverted back to thinking about past behaviors. And again, can't change the past, right? And that he is in a constant process, obsessive quest for the perfect Ashlar. Just as a side note, one of the things that was alluded to me was that the only perfect Ashlar is when you're at a funeral, Masonic funeral, right? The idea that the Mason has passed on and then he becomes quote unquote perfect. Initially I accepted that and I thought, okay. I mean, I get it, but was he perfect when he died? I don't know. What's perfection? But he talked about he can be a better brother, scoutmaster, father, husband, friend, and that the kindness and love you put together with others will never last if you don't have kindness and love for yourself. And so it reminded me of, I think, have I told you the story about the steward, the airplane steward, and how they talk about if the, when you get on the airplane and they say, if there's a sudden drop in pressure, the mask will drop from the ceiling, put your mask on first, and then assist somebody else. And there was a leader that talked about that idea that, well, why do they say put your mask on first? Because if you don't, you can't help the person next to you because you'll be dead. So you've got to help yourself first. You've got to work on yourself first before you can help somebody else. And so that's the comment I have on there is put your mask on first or help yourself first. Try to work on perfecting your Ashlar or use a little less mortar with that trowel.
There's an author that I read, and one of the lines that he always uses that self-care is not selfish. Is that if you don't look after yourself, you're no use to anyone else. And I think I got out of this article is that's what the author just needs to. He's on the right path because he realizes that he's not perfect and that he does have work to do, but he needs to realize that he may no one's ever perfect. I mean, perfection is not possible. It's as I've said previously, it's the journey there. It's the chipping away at your rough Ashlar to remove a little bit more of that roughness from you so that you are, I don't know, less abrasive to the people around you. Or I don't remember that. I'm not even sure if that even works for me because I'm exceedingly abrasive. But yeah, it's just it's a little bit. If today I'm a little bit better than I was yesterday, then I've done my job.
And I think interestingly, this article is actually exemplifying that. He is in himself pointing out to himself and to us, I suppose, but to himself that this is a problem, and he's pointing out to himself how he's working on the problem. I think that it's actually sort of meta, deep something there. There's a good word for that I can't think of, but
deeply insightful at different levels.
For sure. And he alludes that he blames himself for not communicating his intentions on things or when he has a project or an idea. And so again, it's that self. Yes, he's trying to improve himself. Yes, he's trying to get his message across. But then when it doesn't happen, he's kind of going back and blaming himself again. And you have to get past that. I don't know if there's. That's one. I've been trying to be positive this whole time about ideas, but that is one thing I would agree with Stephen that it's a little bit lost in negativity in some points. And even at the very end, how even though in writing the story, he talks about that he's kind of reminiscing on those things, but you just have to move on, really. I don't know any other way to put it.
And it sounds like, I mean, he's he's, at least as far as I can tell, obviously I haven't lived his life. He lives 3,000 miles from here, but he's working on these things. He's contemplating and going to therapy and that sort of stuff. And I think that's important. He's making those steps, just like we were talking about.
Yeah, it's a transformation process.
Right.
And he alludes a little bit to alchemy. We didn't really get into alchemic side of things. Did I see Jarrod's eyebrows raised? No.
Alchemy. Where to begin?
The thing that was interesting to me that I hadn't thought about, the idea of alchemy and the transmutation, the development of yourself and the development of from one thing to another, was that the rough ashlar, the stone, the idea that it comes from earth and becomes something else, right? It becomes something new and fresh or whatever to be fitted. And we as humans, right, with the idea from dust to dust, ashes to ashes, dust to dust. So we as humans also come from the earth and are also fitted and try to make ourselves better. That was an interesting correlation.
I always like the idea of us improving ourselves in building a better society, like we're trying to build a better temple. And that's a very important point that we need to always put forward, is that going out, like improving ourselves improves society, because how do I want to say this?
Because we are part of society?
Well, not so much that we're always part of society, but by chipping away those rough pieces of ourselves and polishing our understanding of ourselves and our society around us makes society run more efficiently. Is that where I'm going with this? I think so.
Well, I pulled out the Morals and Dogma just to see what it might talk about. And it alluded, and this, of course, that's an older text, and so it has no idea what the current state of government is. But it alluded that the rough ashlar is the people, and the perfect ashlar is the government. And the idea is that it's in its perfected state, it has a balance and order to it, and it was meant to be that it was representative of the people, so it came from the people. The rough ashlar became, the perfect ashlar, being the government, can only come from the rough ashlar. It can't come from something else. It can't create itself. It comes from the people and is representative of the people. And so it was interesting to think about that. Again, I wouldn't necessarily correlate the government with the perfect ashlar these days, but it was an interesting correlation.
I don't know that I would ever have made that comparison. I think the government is more a reflection of.
But it is actually an interesting concept when you think of if the government is a perfect ashlar and us removing pieces of, smoothing out our rough ashlars, it actually makes sense, because we take, like if we think about how our society now versus our society 50 years ago versus our society 100 years ago, and how our government reacts to issues that come up, we are actually improving and perfecting that which governs us and is created by us and is
a constant improvement. Yeah, absolutely. Just like I was listening to the podcast too, I was saying that like the Constitution. While the Constitution's a relatively perfect document, it's not, because there's been many amendments. And so it's not a perfect document either. So I like that idea that the ashlars represent society. I like that, Jarrod.
And that document was written by humans, and we're inherently imperfect. So how could it be?
I don't know. This requires more thought.
But the thing is, that is actually an excellent, because we are I shouldn't say we, because it's not my constitution. We have something different up here, but it is. I mean, there hasn't been an amendment in a while, but whenever society sees a roughness in their ashlar that needs to be smoothed out, they do fix it. They do change it. Is it an ideal analogy? No, but it is a good one.
And it's similar to the modernization of masonry. While we talk about no innovations, things like that, masonry has changed over its 400, 500, how many ever years it's been around. It's changed dramatically. It's not the same as it was before. It is at the core probably similar, but there's been a lot of changes. Perfection. Maybe there'll be a modern ritual someday, Matt.
Oh, you're going to get Jarrod to drive across the border just so he can smack me again. There's a lot of stuff here, yeah, for sure, as far as the Ashlars go, and this one brother's journey, and
one last thing, I don't mean to get it here right at the end of the show necessarily, and I don't want to necessarily go down another rabbit hole, but it was another piece I highlighted was that he talked about the improvement process and his obsession with it like an addiction. And I thought, oh, that's very interesting. Jarrod, you talked about the psychology of things and about the that idea of analyzing things, and to some extent, if you are trying to improve yourself too much, if you will, or too constant focus on it, and thinking that you can change things, or going the opposite direction. I think the idea is that you think you can change it, and then when you can't, then you go into this depression state, and it's like an addiction.
Well, yeah, because it's that whole, when you focus on perfection as the ultimate goal, and when you fail, it's because it's our fault we failed. It wasn't that possibly the goal was unattainable, or possibly something we didn't take into account out there that we can't control stopped us from doing it. And it sends that spiral down. It's interesting because I've heard of, you always hear the story of the bodybuilder who, you look at them and they are an Adonis, but when they see themselves, they see that their one calf isn't as symmetrical as their other one. Arnold Schwarzenegger's biography. This is going down a rabbit hole, but I got to do it anyway. I read Arnold Schwarzenegger's biography a couple of years ago, and it made me appreciate bodybuilders, what they do more than they're not just going out pumping iron and making themselves pretty, because he talks about his calves and how when you're in a competition, the fact that your calves are not quite symmetrical can lose you points. And this is where we start getting into the issue with the perfect Ashlars, that there's always something more that isn't quite right with the Ashlar. And if we're always focused on the flaw and not, the journey. Oh, there's a quote. Okay. Another quote I got it from another. Another author that I read. This is a beautiful one. Is he always talks about measure the gain, not the gap. I don't know if you heard that. Whereas you may not, like, if you set a goal, you may fall short of that goal, and you shouldn't beat yourself up for falling short of that goal, because you have actually gained something, even if you didn't gain the entire goal. And I think this is whenever people talk about their perfect Ashlar, and this is always the point that seems to be glossed over, is that they worry too much about the end result and not about how the work they put in to get there, and whether or not it has been enough to make them a better person, which in most cases it usually is. Anytime that you try to improve yourself even a little bit makes you better than you were before.
Right. And, I got to give this worshipful brother, Robert Jackson, credit for putting it all down, putting this part of his journey down on paper and putting it out there for people, because whether it's a little bit of there's so many different angles and lessons in this document itself that I'm sure will be a benefit to young Masons coming up through their journey. And hopefully in their early years in Masonry, they get enlightened into documents like this, so that they can be cognizant of thinking about the future part of their journey and how it can have an effect, right? So
I think that between what Jarrod and Steve just said, I don't think there's a better way to sum up this article. The perils of the perfect Ashlar, the tyranny of the perfect over the progress that we can make in our lives every day is a powerful thing. And this brother was, as like Steve just said, was his willingness to put forth his journey and put it in a public forum like this and help us out by helping himself and showing how he is helping himself is a powerful thing. And so with that, I guess we want to thank Worship Brother Robert Jackson for writing this article, The Perils of the Perfect Ashlar on Midnight Freemasons. And I want to encourage all of you, if you have some thoughts on the article, please put some comments in. We're always happy to see what people think about our inane ramblings and about the good stuff that we read. So if please put some stuff down there and let us know what you think. And with that, on behalf of Steve and Jarrod and David and myself, we thank you all for listening and look forward to talking again next time on the Working Tools Podcast. Goodbye.